You're now listening to Voices of Lynn. My name is Justice, and I'll be your host for this episode of Table Talks. For this series, I'll be speaking with local residents, business owners, elected officials, students, as well as current and former employees of businesses here in Lynn to discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic has had an effect on them either personally or professionally, and what are some of the things that they're doing to get through it. I do want to make it clear that the opinions of our guests are theirs alone and do not reflect the opinions of our host or Voices of Lynn podcast. I have Brian LaPierre on the line. He's the Lynn City Councilor at large. So first off, Brian, I want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with me for this podcast and for always being responsive to my questions and concerns.
Hey, thank you, Justice. It's great to be on with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
For sure, man. First off, I want to ask, how are you and your family doing during this quarantine?
You know, we're holding up okay. I think, this is such an unbelievable sort of adaptation to our lives, and everyone's sort of staying at home, and there's a lot of folks hurting out there, but overall we're really, happy, healthy. We're hanging in together, and we're doing a lot of things together that we never normally did. So there's homework help, there's day-to-day stuff that's getting done. My wife's a teacher, as you may know, and I work for teachers, so we're just working from home and trying to keep our sanity and getting some daily exercise and walking like a lot of families around Lynn. So all in all, we're holding up well. I hope you and your family are doing well as well.
Great. Yeah, we are, and I'm happy to hear that your family's doing as well, too. Since your wife's a teacher and you working for the schools, how have you seen this? As we all know from outside perspective that it's had an effect on the school system and the learning experience, but from being in it, right there, front-facing, what are some of the things that you've observed for the challenges that some of the students and even the teachers are going through?
Sure. I mean, when Friday, March 13th came down and staff were told to report without students and just really prepare for online resources and learning in an digital age where we used to, pen and pencil, blackboards, face-to-face contact, that's pretty dramatic for teachers, who spend their careers in classrooms. So all of the teachers that I know around the Lynn school system band together. They did teamwork. They had about 6 hours to come up with what was about 3 to 4 weeks of online resources by grade level and subject matter. And, I mean, so far it's going well. I think there are more and more things happening organically now with Lynn teachers, online. We're learning Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all of the other apps that allow us to sort of connect with our kids and parents. And my wife's been fielding emails and starting to bone up on just online learning. And we're changing from books to, recipes to learn math and science, or nature walks to do science, or, geological or genealogy, life history is now living history, right? Through this whole pandemic. So for these kids, this is real life experience. It's experiential learning. It's project based. It's online now, and I think we're finding firsthand that teachers are very much appreciated in every household, not only in Lynn but across the country and in Massachusetts, because it's very hard to keep kids engaged without screen time. They don't need more screen time. What they need is and this is tough to do under these circumstances, but we're making it work at least through week 3. And I don't know for how long this will be, but it's certainly throughout May 4th right now. So it's adjusting and adapting, but teachers have been great. Students have been really receptive, and parents on the whole have been really good in engaging with their kids in new ways. So all in all, we're making the best out of a tough situation.
Right. No, that sounds amazing. You actually answered a couple of the questions that came to mind as you were speaking about the experiential learning and the adaptive learning and teaching process. It seems like Lynn is making some strides in that. So thank you for the work that you've been doing with the schools. And if you could pass on my gratitude as well to your wife, that would be great.
No, I will. I think Dr. Tutwiler, our superintendent, really laid out an ambitious goal initially and has put forth these guidelines. And Lynn's, I think, on the cutting edge, along with the commissioner who set out, I think on Wednesday, these guidelines of sort of online distance learning went into effect. So, there's always going to be gaps because we're not face-to-face with kids. But I think making the best out of this situation, and it's going well, and people are trying to keep focused on academics and not let this half a year be at a loss. So I do tip my hat to the local leadership here in Lynn and the governor and the commissioner of education for the Commonwealth. So it's been going really well so far.
Right Right on. That's great to hear. And being a Lynn resident myself, that definitely makes me feel proud to know that, there's that type of proactive approach, because they're going to be the future, and it's interesting to think, what are their stories going to be for future challenges, when they turn to the people next to them and say, come on, I've been through this COVID-19 pandemic. And
exactly, absolutely.
They'll know how to adapt, I think, a little bit differently than if not.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right, Justice.
One of the other questions I want to ask, from your observation, not so much what we see on the news about saying who's following the guidelines, who's following the rules, and who's not. From your observation, being active in the community, are you seeing residents and businesses here taking things serious or still behind the curve?
Sure. So I think a little bit of both. I think I'd say 80 to 90% of Lynn families are doing what they can and doing what they're told in terms of just, shutting down of the nail salon and barber shops. And some of these things were very difficult a week ago Wednesday, and we felt the effects of that, the small business person, right? You've got your delivery and takeout that seems to be going pretty well. I think if there's a shortfall, it's around our parks and playgrounds still. As you may know, we caution tape all of the 40 Lynn parks and playgrounds.
Yeah, I saw that.
You can't have a policeman out there. You can't have the enforcement. What we're seeing still are team games and some, people using hoops for basketball and the like. We're trying to caution to stay off the play equipment. The play equipment is really germ-ridden, so even though it's a new structure, like down on Warren Street, they just got this whole $125,000 new top lot with play equipment, and that's a brand new shiny toy to an 8-year-old. So the parents really have to do a good job right now of just trying to keep kids from touching that stuff and going in playgrounds. That's why we caution tape them, and I'm still getting reports that people are kind of playing these contact sports and throwing a ball up in the air. The balls have germs on them as well.
Right.
It's just a time to cool off. I mean, a hike through the woods, a walk through the park, that's great. The beach is fine, as long as there's social distancing, at least that 6-foot adherence. We were just down doing a canned good drive this morning at City Hall. Folks dropping off cans, others picking up little, care packages to get them through the weekend. Salvation Army's been an unbelievable partner for the city of Lynn. They're going to be serving from 9 to whenever the food runs out, Monday through Friday. These are canned goods and non-perishables.
That's great.
And then we have the Lynn School lunch program at Marshall Middle School on Brookline Street, and then English High School on Goodrich Street, and then, of course, you have Lynn Tech on Neptune Boulevard and Lynn Classical High School on O'Callaghan Way. Those 4 schools are open for business for lunch drop-off. It's like grab and go. Anyone in the city under 18 years of age from 11 to 1 p.m., and the nice thing about that is on Fridays, they give you 3 bags to take home. They give you enough for Friday's lunch, and then they give you enough for Saturday and Sunday to get you through. So if people are food insecure, there are some nice opportunities to take advantage because some of the grocery stores are running out of, key things. So
right. No, it's great to know. Thank you for sharing that information. I'll add some links to the resources that you'd mentioned too in the description of the podcast when it's published.
That would be terrific.
One of the other things too, just to kind of circle back around the adaptations you've had to make in the school system for parents who aren't tech savvy. I mean, I'm talking those who don't really even know how to turn a computer on or to navigate any programs, and also maybe not even having the means to buy laptops to even begin to get savvy. What are some of the families been doing, or has the school been doing to help kind of remedy that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point and good question. So I know for a fact when the pandemic first came to our city, on that first Monday, March 16th, parents were able to access hard copy all of the documents and work assignments, from like 9 to 1 that morning. I don't know since if the schools are now closed, they're shuttered. Before we had that little window of opportunity so parents could pick up their packets for their kids. I think Dr. Tutwiler and the school committee are working on some kind of a device distribution, but I'm not sure as of, they had a school committee meeting this past Tuesday night, a special meeting. The topic came up. There wasn't yet a system put into place. I know both in Revere and Boston, they have given Chromebooks to students with families who lack internet. He did say a lot of the surveys do have internet capacity, and that website, lynnschools.org, does give each school the online resources they need. So even if you were to be able to access the website, you could then perhaps print out some work for your child. But again, I understand that technology is scarce in some households, and high-speed internet and the like is tough to come by. So without picking up that hard copy packet, I think they're going to have to do another run of hard copy work to get us through the next month.
Okay.
And I'm sure there'll be an announcement on that coming from Dr. Tutwiler and his team, because I know they're very aware of that situation.
Okay, great. I just asked because someone I was speaking with recently, a resident of Lynn, whose little brother for a while didn't have access to have a laptop. They ended up being able to figure it out, but that made me think of something that I wasn't even aware of myself, and I figured you and Mr. Tutwiler must be aware of it. I just wanted to know for myself if there was anything in place or coming,
and you know,
so
Justice,
I can share with people.
It's a good point no matter what, I would always follow up with the building principal, because maybe they've initiated something that we aren't aware of in terms of a loan program where there's a cart and they have a device that families can borrow and sign out and be responsible for. I just don't know if that's taking place in all of our 30 schools or not, but the principals are still in the buildings. They're still reporting to work for issues that do arise in the schools, and they're cleaning the schools still, so custodials are still working. CAF workers, particularly around those schools I mentioned for the grab and go, are still working. So it's always best to check individually with the school that the child attends.
Okay, great. Now that makes sense too, and thank you for sharing that. Another conversation I've been having with some private landlords, and I'm sure you're getting this question a lot too, about what about rent and what about mortgage? Quite a few landlords that I've spoken to, some in Lynn, some in other cities in Massachusetts, have already told their tenants not to suspend payment, but they said, like, they don't have to pay their rent. They waived their rent and said, we're going to get through this together. And it was really, it was inspiring. It was incredible to learn that. I said, wait, you're not letting them pile up debt, so what's going to happen with you? And they're still trying to figure that out. So I called Senator Crichton's office the other day and asked them if there's any conversation, among their group, as far as I know there's a conversation about rental freeze or suspension, but that just seems to pile up debt. And I wanted to speak with you, and I'm going to speak with a few other members of the council and anyone you recommend that I should speak to after this, for what relief, either locally, statewide, or federally, may be available to help the landlords who are waiving rent. Could there be maybe a grant program for private landlords to be able to cover any of the amounts that they're missing out on from their tenants? Is that something that the idea of that could even be brought to the council, or would it need to go to like EDIC or community development? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up, I think it's one of the biggest issues around Lynn, regardless of even this pandemic, is the housing shortage, the instability. Folks who are, even before, they were living right on the fringes, paycheck to paycheck. I say day to day with reported income and so forth, but with these layoffs that are happening across the city, there has to be some relief put in place. The federal government stimulus package has been passed now. That's only going to go so far to keep folks in their apartments, and obviously courts are closed. We're not looking to evict folks from the court standpoint, but you're absolutely right in thinking out of the box, and how are we going to not just defer and kick the can for 3 or 4 months for folks who owe the back pay and rent, but how do we waive it completely and hold folks harmless, along with banks who are trying to, a lot of this funding, I think, as we see the federal package unpack itself, there's going to be a lot of remedy, but a lot of it, again, is grant-sponsored and loans. So someone's going to be paying back those loans. I know I got a call from a constituent just today. It's just, as luck would have it, the City of Lynn tax bills went out a couple days ago. And then the trash fee, to compound it, the trash fee went out as well. So we're very sensitive to that, the needs, the tax collector. I think they're going to be lenient, but you can't just say as a blanket, hey, no one pay anything any longer. So I think everything's got to be determined on a case-by-case basis, and I think everyone will look at this and have some generosity in their heart to some extent. But of course, the landlords are making mortgage payments to the banks, and the banks are loaning the money. So it really does affect all areas, from the renters
of what I've anticipated. I think everyone's anticipating like what the next few steps may be, while analyzing the data to say, here's what's happened. We can see this pattern, and looking at, the housing crisis like you mentioned before the pandemic. There's a lot of people looking at this may be the time to have an empathetic approach. Whereas some of the data and stuff indicates that we are still just kicking the can down the road. And I know you said that we can't have a blanket, like nobody pay your property tax. But thinking outside of the box, let's say a resident or a business owner, somebody in the city, maybe even someone on the council has an idea to remedy some of the anxieties and the uncertainty. What would be the process, do you think, in this time, knowing that things are happening super fast, to really elevate the discussion?
Yeah, I think a combination of, I'd be very supportive of like a municipal relief along with a state match, so the cities and towns ought to be able to match with the state, maybe not dollar for dollar, but if all
right.
three components of legislators from council to state legislation, then to congressional legislation with the surplus, with the, I should say the $2 trillion
right.
stimulus package. If we look at all three of these buckets and what can we come up with, whether it's a voucher program temporarily to help the real poorest of poor that aren't going to make it or to remain in their homes, I think that's very, very, we could partner with Lynn Housing, I think, on that, economic development, as you mentioned. We have some of the agencies in place already.
Right.
The board comes to mind, some of these nonprofits, Build-A-Bed, Habitat for Humanity,
right. Yep.
Lynn Shelter Association, you name the nonprofit, I'm sure they're going to be first in line to lend a hand through this crisis.
Absolutely.
But I think it's got to be, both state, local, and then the federal all kicking in for housing concerns and trying to alleviate some of the pressures of our families right now that are laid off, that can't make rent. And we have to take it from there. But as you said, it's got to happen very quickly. We can't drag our feet on this,
Right, and that's why I was asking about kind of where do you think this idea could go? Because as I'm sharing it with you over the phone, and I know you're not the ultimate decision maker to say, yeah, that's it, let's do it. I think the more we're looking to cast a wider net and maybe tap into some of the collective genius that we have, I think we'll come up with that solution, even if it sounds like something that among two people we might say, no, that's not likely, that's not possible. But when there's a whole wave of people experiencing the same thing, I think it creates an opportunity for maybe a new agreement.
I do think you're right about that, and it's the most pressing issue. Even if it's a 25% reduction that you don't have to come up with in your rent, that will keep people in their homes.
Right.
So some grant application, some program that temporarily offers assistance. I think what we're struggling with, Justice, is the fact that revenues have been hit very hard through this couple of week pandemic because the state revenues are down, I hear, anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion. Lynn is heavily reliant on state money to get back down the lottery, tolls, sales tax. So all of these things really will have a negative outlook on Lynn, and we're not really out of the hole in terms of financially. We were just starting to put money away and have our stability fund grow, and then this happened. Now, the state is in a very healthy position because they've got a couple billion in rainy day fund. So it may be an issue where the legislature takes on some of that and dedicates it to housing shortages and people being able to pay their bills, and then maybe the city can help a little bit, and along with the stimulus. So looking at combinations of things, and of course, in the same token, you got to look at what's coming in and what isn't coming in now that used to come in.
Right on. Okay, yeah, it almost seems like as people are looking at their glass getting emptier and emptier, there's this awareness that there's a truck full of water about to make its delivery. But as people are looking at that empty glass, it's a matter of, do I wait for this delivery or do I go find another way to fill my cup?
I would recommend too, you're absolutely right, because there's only so much to go around. We have worked out issues around National Grid and utilities, Lynn Water and Sewer, cable, those things, the light bill, those things, gas, in terms of National Grid for gas as well. Those utilities will take a back seat during this. I think the key focus is transportation, if you are still working, and ability to have gas in your tank to get back and forth to work, along with a car payment and keeping it insured and on the road. But primarily, it's housing. It's how are you or two, or maybe longer perhaps. And I think that's where everyone's focus is. You've got to, put aside the cell phone bill right now, put aside the cable, put aside the light bill and the gas, water and sewer, knowing that those are going to be on the back seat and back burner. Those are usually much smaller than your rent. But you've got to tackle your rent first. Stay in your home first philosophy, and then take on the rest of the stuff come May or June.
Okay, got it. Since there's a lot of different groups, as you mentioned, already providing resources and they're helping and stepping up to the plate here, off the top of your head, besides the ones that you mentioned, like Salvation Army, Lynn Housing, there's a few other groups now popping up and different initiatives, from food drives to diaper drives. Could you just share maybe a few more groups or organizations that come to mind?
I'd happy to, sure. Good point. So, Lynn, the minute this sort of began to get real in mid-March, Tia Cole and Katie Cohen and a few others, Nicole McLean, set up this Lynn Mutual Aid Fund, and has been taken off. There's a lot of sign-ups for that. People are interacting on Facebook daily on what the needs are. You saw probably this diaper drive that's occurring at the YMCA. Anytime you can drop off diapers, and families are in need of diapers and formula with new babies at home that they can't leave the home. Diapers and formula, as you may know, it's very expensive propositions out there, and those are the things that get lost in traditional food drives that we're doing. Not a lot of people are willing to donate those because it's such at a high premium. So diaper drive down the Lynn YMCA, Lynn Mutual Aid. We also have a good partner in the Washington Baptist Church down next to the police station. They're doing what they can, along with North Shore Labor Council, the New Lynn Coalition, and Lynn United for Change. All of these partners, I mean, we're working closely with every person that wants to lend a helping hand in the city of Lynn. And I got to tell you, the generosity has been unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing that too.
It's really remarkable to see. And unfortunately, it's got to be during this crisis, but it's been really nice to see. I know our president, Darren Sear, goes on Lynn Community Television, which has been another great ally for information. And he goes on every day at 3 o'clock and does a Lynn Daily update. I know the mayor is updating us. One message, very consistent message out of the mayor's office during this pandemic that all the councils are trying to share information from. So there's a lot of resources, and a lot of it is on Facebook, and we're trying to tap into Lynn Community Television and the Daily Item as well.
Great. That's awesome. Yeah, and like you said, it's unfortunate that it took a crisis like this. I think the best thing that we'll take from this will be the empathy that we learned, and hopefully a strengthened sense of our humanity.
100%. It's really like you're hosting the Voices of Lynn. This is a collective 90,000+ voices coming together, lending a hand to whoever needs it, helping neighbors across the street and next door, and just trying to get through this safely and healthy. And we know that's not going to be the case for every single one of our folks. We've got right now, as of today, I don't know the latest numbers, but we had 28 infected with the virus that reside in our city. That's up from 2 to 6 to 8 to 14 to now 28. So it is climbing. We're all trying to do what we're told to limit that scope. We're not nearly like crises of Boston or New York or LA, but certainly Louisiana, New Orleans. But we're certainly cognizant of we got to help thy neighbor. We got to do what we can and just flatten this curve and get through this as best as we can over the next few weeks.
Right on. Well, Brian, I thank you so much for your time and for sharing, your insights and your advice. Not just with me, but with the community of Lynn and whoever else around the world may hear this. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the people of Lynn? Either offer any words of comfort or advice, or anything that you want to elevate your voice up to the federal level? Anything you want to say to people running the country right now, our president?
Sure. No, I think just in closing, Lynn, being born and raised here, we are resolute. We are a feisty and a resilient bunch as a whole, and a lot of the country could take a snapshot of what we are doing here in the city of Lynn and starting to follow our guidelines, because ultimately I think Lynn is very smart. They get it. They're street smart. They're streetwise. And we know that this is serious, and the more people that can take this serious, whether it's in our hometown or in the Commonwealth or throughout the country, everyone's got to stay on the same page right now. This is not the time to be an outlier. It's not the time to be a pariah. We need to listen to our local government. We need to listen to our state and federal partners. And if we do that, we're going to minimize, some of the I want to keep all Lynn families safe. And the best way we can do that is just take a deep breath right now, get through this together as families, spend the time we can with each other, reconnect. And in a lot of ways, there's been silver linings throughout this process.
Yes.
And I can't thank the people of Lynn enough as an elected official and really take my job to heart. You guys have just been outstanding, and I just hope it continues. And God bless everyone in the city of Lynn.
Right on. Brian, again, thank you so much for being another trusted voice in the community. I wish nothing but wellness and safety and happiness for you and your family.
Thank you, Justice. You do the same.
Thanks, man. Have a great weekend. Take care.
You too.